Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of Policy to Practice. Today we have with us Professor Amitabh Kundu. Need no formal introduction of his own, but for the matter, he is a member of National Statistical Commission and a former professor from JNU. Good to have you, sir.
Thank you.
Sir, just to start with, how would you like to describe yourself?
Well, I am a teacher, I'm a researcher. I work on social issues, I work on minorities, I work on deprived sections in the society, but certainly I'm not a missionary. I take up issues of the vulnerable population because I find them to be important in the policy making and are not getting due attention. So basically I would like to describe myself as a researcher and not really a research activist, although some of my research do fit into the active movement and also get into the policy making, although they may not be getting approval, but certainly I have contributed to some extent in the areas of concern in the society and social development.
Right, sir, very well said. So, to shorten to a topic for this talk with you, it took us a while to navigate and stick to a point. But nevertheless, considering the socio-political and socio-religious as well factor of the country where it's going, we feel migration is something needs to be addressed at this package out.
Absolutely.
So we would love to hear some of your thoughts, your analysis, your observations on socio-religious observation when it comes to migration dynamics in India. Could you give an overview of how it is across the dynamics and the nuances?
You see, I believe that migration is one of the most challenging, most difficult area of social research and less explored.
Right.
I sometimes describe migration research to be the Cinderella in research, getting in a way unfair treatment from the mother institutions because after the population census, well, unfortunately we don't have the census for 2021, but even earlier, census is conducted in 91, 2001, 2011, but the migration tables come after 6 or 7 years.
Right.
There is no priority given to that, and the reason, partly, I must tell you why migration research in India particularly hasn't received the due attention is because data problem.
Correct.
You see, migration requires information on when did you come, duration of your stay, and India is a free country. It's
Right.
free mobility.
Right.
And that's why there is no record of somebody's movement, even if you are crossing boundary of one state to another state, which is the case in many other federal countries. There's no record unless somebody specifically collects the information. That is the data-related problem, and that gets accentuated because many people would not like to mention that they are a migrant. There are socio-political reasons.
Right.
Because many of the states have certain facilities for the locals. Even there are reservations for the locals in the state sector jobs, and also some of the states have issued ordinances that the private sector should also give priority to the locals, to the migrants.
Right. Right.
Also, many of the people who are responding to the questions asked by census or national sample survey or any other organization about your status as a migrant or a non-migrant, many would like to say I'm a non-migrant.
Right.
Because many of the facilities given by the public agencies like the urban local development authorities, our housing boards, etc., they are meant for those who have stayed at that place for more than 10 years or 15 years.
Right.
So people deliberately would not report that they have come here before 6 months or 1 month or 1 year.
Right.
This is the reason why the migration data is a bit shaky. If you go even by the reported figures, people don't report it honestly. So there are socio-political factors and data-related factors, and that's the reason that you find that the migration studies in India have really not gone very well. I mean, there's not much data available, although for employment, unemployment, consumption, expenditure, poverty, it's a massive literature. On migration, you find very limited kind of information coming up.
Correct. Very well said, sir. Like, considering the fact that there are a very few number of institutions like IIMAD or CDS, Trivandrum, that too in the down south, researching on specific issues related to migration, out migration, in migration. Right, sir. Like, double clicking on the employment aspect of migration in India, especially interstate migrants. Like, how do we see the trend from the rural to the urban, or the urban to the rural, or in general rural or urban? Like, do we see any trend, or have we seen a pattern over the years in such dynamics?
Good that you could at least find one research institution which has done some work on migration,
Right.
Trivandrum, and that's basically because of Zakaria, who was a stalwart in migration. But in recent years, you find that Trivandrum Institute is also engaged in various other areas, and migration is a small component. But one thing that strikes me about the migration studies, this is not only the case in India but also globally. Migration studies are somehow characterized by negativity. Migration means infiltration. Migration means slum creation. Migration means HIV/AIDS, unemployment, dirty living conditions, people not paying taxes to the municipal government. Somehow there is not a positive approach to migration. That migration is something which is allowing laborers to move to the places where they can get a better absorption. I mean, in a country, migration should be viewed as a mechanism of, matching the demand and supply in spaces. There are excess supply, and that is a very positive element. Unfortunately, that is not the case in the migration studies, and I think what you asked me is that one should look at the trends of movement from rural to urban areas, or from one state to another, with little more positivity. As you're asking about what has been the trend in the migration, the first question that comes today is COVID.
Correct, exactly.
Did it disturb the migration trend massively? Is migration rate very high in India? It had gone up tremendously because of the dislocation that took place because of COVID. I would like to say these are all false statements. In India, the rate of migration is not very high. Would you believe that presently, if we have something like 1,440 million people, would you believe that about more than 800 million people out of 1,400 million people haven't moved out even once in their lifetime
That's shocking.
from the place of where they were born for more than 6 months?
That's shocking.
800 million people are born and die at the same place without going to any other place for 2-3 days or for a month. You exclude that.
Correct.
Migration in India, Census and National Sample Survey define as somebody who changes the place of residence by more than 6 months. Okay. So neither for education nor for health treatment, 850 million people in India, that is something, more than 60%, they haven't changed their position. So migration rate is pretty low, and maybe one can say that it is part of Indian value system and culture. When Yudhishthir was asked a question by Yaksha, the famous Yaksha Yudhishthir Samvad. So Yaksha asked, who is happy on earth? Do you know what Yudhishthir's reply was? Yudhishthir said, a person who earns his bread, his food, by the sweat of his forehead, that means who does some amount of physical labor, and who is not a migrant. Migration is supposed to be the source of unhappiness, misery. And that's why, the Meghdut was the story of somebody who has been sent out of the country, of the place. So migration was considered to be a negative thing. You should be born and live in your own country. But nowadays, when you look at the long queues in front of the American embassy or the German embassy, you find that happiness lies in getting a green card. But nonetheless, that could be a factor that why migration rate is not very high. Also, there are linguistic barriers. We are different.
Right.
And more recently, of course, as you know, particularly during the COVID period, many state governments passed ordinances. In fact, they are thinking of bringing in legislation to reserve jobs for the locals.
Correct.
That would go against the labor market unification. That would really dampen the movement of people from one state to another. Because many of the state governments are trying to be populist, trying to say, we will create jobs for the people.
Right.
Son of the soil, and reservation should be there for the local people, not only in the state government employment, but also they issue orders for the private sector that at the lowest level, below certain income, you should give preference to the locals. For the higher level professionals, you can get it from the national market.
Right.
So that could be another reason why migration rate is not very high. But what about COVID? Did it disturb the past migration trend, and is it that the massive out-migration took place from urban areas to the rural areas, and now the migration in urban areas, migrants are much less, people have all gone back to Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, they were the out-migrating states, including Rajasthan. Is it true that there is a massive change in the migration pattern? That's a question which is being asked. Frankly, we have migration statistics from a select indicator survey of National Sample Survey, and also we have some information from periodic labor force survey on migration. And surprisingly, what we notice is that the percentage of migrants in the rural areas in 2020, around that time, percentage of those who are in migrants in the rural areas, means who are there who have spent some time elsewhere for more than 6 months, is not very different from what we have seen in 2007-8, which means that those who are dislocated. Similarly, for urban areas also, the percentage of migrants in the urban areas in 2020 or 2019 is more or less same as 2007-8 or 2011. Similarly, percentage of migrants in the rural areas are more or less the same, which really means that this massive dislocation which took place, people ran for their lives without transport, walked the distance, got into overcrowded trains or buses. This was all a short-term phenomena. They all came back. So it's the economic factor, these health and other exigencies, they disturb you psychologically, they disturb temporarily. But in the long run, it's the economic differential. People went back to the rural areas, found it very difficult. Because the local people resented that these fellows had gone back to big cities and now have come back. So they have difficulties in getting absorbed. So within 6 months or 8 months or within a year, they're all back to their places where they had migrated. So I would think that the rate of migration is not very high, but that may be disturbed in the short run because of health or other reasons, medical reasons. But it's basically the economic factor, and people continue to exercise their judgment of moving to places where the earnings are better. It's basically the employment-related migration, which has remained more or less the same, and I really don't believe that migration has changed or will affect the long-term trend of migration in any significant manner.
Right. No wonder India is called as nation with multiple nationalities. Also, since this is the election year as well, and when I went across the largest two parties' manifesto, even though it's an applause that migration has gained attention there, but criticisms are there to say that the idea of migration and policies related to migration are very city-centric. So like double clicking to what you have said as well about the opportunities in the lack of opportunities, in fact, in the rural areas. How do you think setting up opportunities in the village areas, and what would be the distress in the out migration, and also maybe thinking through Gandhian idea of village republics as well?
You are right that, not only Gandhi ideas, even culturally people are more, likely to stay back in their own places if given an option. And people do migrate among the poor for economic reasons, for their distress.
Correct.
For, of course, the skilled and professionals is the opportunity. But you are right that there are certain current factors which figured in the political agenda also. You know that the southern states, most of them, have total fertility rate below the replacement level.
Okay.
Replacement level fertility is 2.1. That means 100 couple will produce 210 children.
Right.
And if 100 couple produce 210 children, by the time the children become adults, some of them will die, so 200 people will be replaced by 200 adults. So that is the population stabilization. And most of the southern states are below that level. That means in the long run, the supply of labor would be less, would become less. You will be, because number of young people who are eligible for employment, who should be in the labor force, that will go down. Whereas the total fertility rate in the northern states, which are generally less developed and somewhat poorer,
Correct.
there you find the fertility rate is very high. Some of these states it is more than 2.5, 3.
Correct.
And if 100 couple are producing 300 children, that means 100 couple means 200 people are producing 300 children. Number of youth will be much larger.
Right.
So there will be north-south migration. Because many of the northern states will be surplus in adult labor force. So that is one possibility which is emerging, and you do find that although the state governments may be shouting, creating noise, like Karnataka say, oh, we are having too many migrants. So is Tamil Nadu. We heard news in the media that some migrant workers were bashed up, beaten up in some of the southern states. But immediately the minister comes forward and says, no, this is not true. We would welcome the migrants. The long-term interest of many of the southern states, they would like to have the migrants because the labor shortage there, and the entrepreneurs particularly. The entrepreneurs would like to have, migrants because the local labor is more expensive, local labor is more organized, and as a result of that, it is easier to deal with the migrant laborers because they are more vulnerable and they wouldn't make much of a noise.
Thank you so much for that answer. So we have seen southern states being attracted, or receiving at the receiving end for a while now, like Kerala, Hyderabad as well. So is there any trend or data to show that livelihoods aspect, or there has been a change in the lifestyle of people who are recurringly or constantly migrating for majorly employment opportunities to the southern states?
You see, there is a thesis, and some policymakers and researchers believe that the migration statistics which is generated by the official agencies, like the population census, like National Sample Survey, they are not actually capturing the real migration stream. Why they are saying it is because there is a large number of short duration migrants, migrating for 3 months, 4 months. But census and National Sample Survey do not consider them to be migrants unless they stay for more than 6 months. So that is short duration seasonal migrants are getting left out in the census data, although we have some information about those who are going for a short period and coming back. But nonetheless, that is one reason. And secondly, I mentioned that many people may not like to mention that they are migrants. They would like to hide it because they would like to get the benefits which the local bodies provide to the non-migrants or those who have stayed for more than 10 years. There are certain facilities that will be available, and the migrant would deliberately mention that I have stayed here for more than 15 years.
Exactly.
Now, that's the reason, Arvind Subramanian, the economic advisor, who brought out the report Economic Census in 2017, what he did, he tried to capture migration data through railway ticket sale.
Okay.
So if you have station to station data from all the railway stations, how many people moved from place A to place B during the year? And how many people moved from B to A during the year?
Right.
So if you find that A to B is more than B to A by 50,000, then you say, oh, this 50,000 moved from A to B. So that is migration. That's how he was trying to capture migration, and he said what we were asking, that there's a massive increase in the migration because he took just the movement pattern, A to B and B to A, and then difference is the migration. But that's really not a very scientific methodology, because somebody, suppose from Begusarai, wants to go to Rohtak. The fellow would come to Delhi first, and from there they will take a bus to go to Rohtak. But he is only taking the railway movement. There are multimodal things, and many people may be traveling for pleasure. So all these problems are there. Taking care of all that, I would think that the pattern of migration has changed in last 2-3 decades. Earlier, migration was from less developed states like, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh and Rajasthan to Maharashtra and Gujarat. Now, these are the two states which received large number of migrants. In the 50s and the 40s, it was West Bengal which was getting massive migration. During the last 50 years of colonial period, Calcutta received, massive migration. But Calcutta's, West Bengal's economic decline explains why the migration to West Bengal came down. But Maharashtra and Gujarat continued to receive.
Right.
What happened in recent decades, because of course the local movement in Maharashtra and some political parties trying to be pro-local, pro-Maharashtrians, there is some agitation, and you do find that the migration stream has shifted in recent years to south. To Kerala, to Tamil Nadu, to Karnataka, so even Andhra Pradesh is receiving large number of migrants from Bengal, for example, from Bihar, Uttar Pradesh. So the pattern of migration has changed, and one of the reasons is that the total fertility rate in the southern states is less than 2.1. And there is a labor shortage here. And frankly, even if the state governments make noise for populist purposes, that we would try to guarantee the local labor full employment by restricting the employment of the migrants, not only in the government but also the private sector. But unfortunately, or fortunately, the private sector people are very much against it. They would very much like the migrants to come in because it is in their interest. And I remember when during COVID, many people went back from Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, back to Bihar, UP and Rajasthan. The private employers were sending buses to their places of origin to bring them back. So I personally believe that in India, in a federal system, we have full right of mobility, equality in access to employment, and any restriction on the mobility of the people and restriction in having access to employment would have to have a constitutional mandate, because I think Indian constitution certainly would not allow this kind of a restriction being imposed at the state level. I know Haryana, for example, had passed ordinances or tried to tell the private sector people that you reserve class 4 employees, the peons and some clerical staff for the locals only. But the High Court, Punjab, Haryana has struck it down, saying that no, I don't think that would be fair, and saying that you cannot make a discrimination under the Indian constitutional system.
Right. So one last question from my end. So this theme of socio-religious observation based on cross-border or within the country, interstate, inter-district migrations, do we see the question of safety, or if I'm asking from a religious point of view as well, or a socio-religious point of view in fact, do we see a discriminatory pattern or any sort of such trends where minorities or historically marginalized sections of the community migrate for the employment opportunities to other states?
I must say that there has been a significant change in the religious composition of the migrants, particularly from rural to urban areas.
Okay.
Our percentage of urban population by 2011 census, the latest census data that we have, is about 32% of the Indians live in the urban areas, roughly. Now it has gone up by maybe 2-3 percentage points. But percentage of scheduled caste population and scheduled tribe population who live in the urban area is much less than 32%, something like 10, 12, 15%. So the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe population are more or less concentrated in the rural areas. A small percentage is in the urban areas, and scheduled tribe population move to the urban areas only when they have a job and reservation helps them. But do you know what is the percentage of Muslim population?
India.
Out of 100, 40% live in urban areas.
Nice.
So in that sense you can say Muslims are somewhat privileged because urban earnings income is higher, urban access to education is better, urban access to health, water supply, sewage, sanitation is better. So 40% of the Muslims live in the urban areas, right?
Correct.
Why is it so? How come Muslims have an advantage in terms of access to urban space? Reason is simple. The Mughal Sultanate and Sultanate and the Mughal period. The kingdom was in the urban areas.
Correct.
And the conversions also took place, and that is the reason why you find, most of the big cities, Hyderabad, Lucknow, Kanpur, Delhi, they had all, Mysore, they had all high concentration of Muslim population. But what I notice is that in the past 2-3 decades, the migration from rural to urban areas of the minorities, also to some extent scheduled caste and scheduled tribe population, has gone down. One reason is labor market. Labor market in the urban areas is demanding more skill, and the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe population do not have that. But Muslim population in the rural areas are not in agriculture. They are in some kind of a non-agricultural employment, repairs or small household industry or manufacturing. They should be having an advantage in moving to the urban areas. But you find that there is a significant decline in the migration of Muslims from the rural to urban areas. One could be difficulties in getting employment, job market discrimination. The second is housing market problems. There may be difficulties in getting a house in the urban areas. So this is something which is emerging recently, that migration of religious minorities, particularly Muslims, from rural to urban areas has declined. So that's a matter of concern, and we must find out what could be the reason. And also, as I said, even scheduled caste population, that scheduled tribe population migration has declined. That seems to be directly linked to the skill requirement, and we need to really do skill formation for the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe population to ensure that they are shared in the urban jobs is not diminished over time.
Right.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for the patience and informative answers. I hope the audience as well as I really enjoyed, and it was insightful for me as well. It was an honor.
Thank you.
Thanks so
Thank you
much.
for having me.